Paradise, we are going to focus again for 45 hardcore minutes on growing unicorns. That's it. And you only grow unicorns by doing two things. Everything else is detail in the middle. Growing your business year after year, preferably at a 200% growth rate, and making sure that you raise enough money so that you can maintain that growth rate, but you don't raise a ridiculous amount of money so you dilute yourself to like a silly extent at the end so you have nothing left. Like every relationship in life, it is a fine and beautiful balance. And on each one of these podcasts or these live streams, the only thing we talk about, I bring in incredible guests for you, people who are extremely skilled, who have either started and built and grown their own incredible companies and had life-changing events from them and are going to share their journey, are people who are specialists in growth and are funding. That's it. Nothing else. That's all we do. Okay. And today is no different. I've got a great new friend of mine, Joey, over at Hawaii Angels. He's had multiple exits, is a phenomenal founder, is a phenomenal investor, and lives in maybe one of the coolest places in the entire world. So Joey and I are going to go at it for a little bit of time. And now, before I do, I want to share a little bit about what happened last week. And I want to talk about perception and about how perception is probably the most important thing. And as many of you know, we went very heavy in on a company called Matchbook. I believe Matchbook is going to be a unicorn. I believe it's going to be a unicorn because I think the market size for data is huge, because I've watched the company and the founder, because I believe the founder is one of the most game-changing people in the entire world. However, the founder is not one of those founders who's out there pitching and looking beautiful as a founder all day, every day. He's actually spending time building his product. And because of that, venture capitalists would have looked at the founder before and said, I'm not sure. Yeah, he's going to get more revenue. Yes, he's got to 3.5 million ARR. Yes, he's probably going to get more than that through, but is he going to build a $50 million plus a year business? Do we believe that he has chops to be able to do that? And that's been his challenge, as he's been trying to break through from seed to Series A, which used to be a little jump. Today, it is a monster jump. It is like climbing up a cliff to go from seed to Series A. So what did we do? We changed the message. I came in as co-founder, which now meant that you have someone whose specialization is on business development, growth, venture capital, and Rushab is going to continue working on product. And we already know we have the greatest product leader inside the space. So in your startups, I want to make sure that you have it very clear in your own minds. A lot of the time, you can be doing everything right, but if the message that is being passed across to the people that you need, whether it be other people in your team, whether it be your family, whether it be venture capitalists, whether it be the customers that you need, change the message. You're the message maker. You get to decide what you want to do. And I will tell you, inside Matchbook, we would probably change the brand, the colors, the messaging, the logo. Who knows? We may even change the name. When other things are perfect, remember, you always have control of what you want to do. And with that, and without further ado, I do want to bring Joey into the room. My man.
Hey, Brian. How you doing?
Are you coming in from Hawaii, or are you stateside?
I am. I'm in Hawaii now. We'll be on the mainland in a couple of weeks. That we're taking our kid to Disney and going to see family.
It's tough, right? It's beautiful. It does seem weird to me leaving the most idyllic place on the entire planet to come to another place, which is pretty messed up, but it has 2 square miles of coolness.
I think Hawaii is beautiful, right? But we have family on the mainland, so we need to travel out. And a lot of the companies the deal flow sometimes is on the mainland, and the other connectors we have. So we're definitely, since COVID, able to connect a lot better than we used to be, because the Overton window is moved and full remote's acceptable and whatnot.
Yeah. And I love this. And you and I are new friends, and I met you over in Hawaii, and we spent some time together over the family office event, and then we spoke since. And I always built up strong respects first and then friendships afterwards, because I think you gotta have that, or stuff gets baseless after a while. And I loved what you did with your companies. I want to share some of the lessons that you took from those, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then also we'll dig into what it takes to build a unicorn. Like the folks who are here are generally, and what you find is like halfway through, people start like going super heavy with questions. But everybody here just wants to do the same thing, man. They want to build a unicorn, or actually forget the term unicorn. I just use it because of habit. I think people want to change want a life-changing event. That's what people want. Life is a scam. It's a scam. I just had a phone call with a pension company. I took out this pension like forever ago, and it was with like the first job I ever had, and I was like, oh, I wonder if there's any money in that, because it was like literally like 25 years ago. And so I called them up, and they're like, oh yeah, you've got a little bit of money in there. And I was like, cool. And so when can I take that out? And I'm guessing there's no tax like in the future if I take it out. And they're like, oh yeah, you get taxed fully. I was like, well, then what's the point in it being called a pension? Like, why don't we just call it like I don't get how that works. And they're going, yeah, a lot of people feel that way. Nobody realizes afterwards. So here's my conclusion with all of life. This is my life lesson in like 3 words. It's a scam, right? It's a scam. It's an institutional scam. And the only way you can bypass the scam, the only way, is you get a life-changing event, which it doesn't have to be $1 billion or $100 million. Honestly, it could be 30 or $50 million. And you're smart with that money. You stay away from drugs, you stay away from divorce, and you stay away from a second divorce, right? And then if you do that, you get to avoid the scam.
Well, I've been through some of those downsides too. I went through a divorce myself. I don't think it's a scam. I think it's a game that you have to learn the rules about, and a lot of people don't learn the rules. I think it's the biggest.
Yeah, that's very eloquently said, and actually probably far more accurate. But because the problem is nobody does know the game, which is kind of the definition of a scam. But anyway, like nobody does know the game, and because they don't know the game, what they do is like their parents tell them, "Oh, this is good. I'm gonna move today." So their parents tell them, "Hey, here's what you should do. You should go to a nice college, right?" Now, I worked at my kid's college, including interest, and a 20-year loan that he would take out would cost him almost $1 million.
It's so stupid.
That's a big 1 mil, right? Okay, house, right? Forget about house right now, because a house, if you're in California, I don't care what projects you're in, you're paying $500,000 for the worst house, worst apartment in the worst place in the worst city, right? So let's say he's average. That's another $2 million. Then he's going to have his own kid. That's another $4 million. And so the thing is this, like, this is all after tax. So the only way out of this like enforced slavery until you're 75 years old is to do what Joey did, right? You go, you find a problem, like a huge problem, something that needs to be solved. And then you go out into the world and you solve that problem, and you work your ass off, and you go through stuff that none of your buddies would be prepared to go through at that stage. And then you get yourself into a position whereby you change the game. You're in control. And that's my whole life goal for people, is just to share this epiphany that I found out like way too late in life. And I wish it on my son, and I wish it on every person that I have good vibes for, is that everybody should go down that path. And so you're right, it's a game, but learn the rules of the game. And so Joey, can you share a little bit? I know you're a master of many, many, many traits when it comes to like growing founders and storytelling and lots of other things around that. But tell us the story about you, and then and how you dragged yourself with your bootstraps to where you got to.
Well, thanks. That's an open-ended. Yeah, so I was a 3-time founder, and then eventually got off the train and got to kind of where I am now, running Hawaii Angels. But actually, I started really young. I always sort of had an entrepreneurial spirit. I always wanted to work on story. I always wanted to sort of help people sell things and sell things myself. I was very early in high school, back when the web was kind of new. I got pulled into a design agency locally, and was designing websites for Discovery Channel and BP Amico, because they saw the value I was providing. I had created a bunch of stuff and thrown it out in the world, and I got sucked in very young, and that led me sort of into this path in startups. When I was in college, I went to Georgia Tech, and I support it. I'm not anti going to college, but I do think the prices have gotten nuts out of this world, and I think that sometimes people go to school for the wrong reason. But while I was in college, I started working in the startup scene, and I eventually started off making websites, and I grew into basically becoming a chief product officer, sort of without that title back then. That title didn't exist. But staffed up teams, thought about product, designed interfaces, thought about how people would use a product. But I started making a network of people that were really good makers and people that would fund. And that's really, really important, because this network that you start early doing the shit you love ends up following with you back, because this is not about one transaction. It's about a lifetime of building these relationships. When I was in law school, went to law school at UVA, I got a call from a buddy of mine in Atlanta who had an idea for something that eventually turned into Vendormate, which is my first startup. And it was 3 of us as a team that built this. And we pivoted a couple times, but where we ultimately landed was as a health compliance startup. So we were going into hospital. By the time we sold it twice, once like a 51% exit to private equity, and then once again to a strategic buyer. But we were in half the hospitals in the country doing basically compliance and badging for hospitals for their vendors. So the opportunity we found was that the federal government, the Joint Commission, was coming down in a hospital saying, if you don't check these boxes, we might withhold your Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements. Part of the scam stuff you're talking about. But basically, a lot of those check boxes had to do with these hospitals knowing their vendors, those Glaxo reps and those Johnson & Johnson reps that used to just walk into the hospital. And what we found after several pivots was that this was becoming a problem for hospitals. They couldn't do it. So we adapted our solution that was a year and a half old. We almost shut down 3 times into hospitals. But now if you were a Johnson & Johnson rep, to go into a hospital to go talk to a doctor, instead of just walking in, you had to print off a badge. But to get that badge, you had to have signed up with us online, done a background check, filled out some forms, and paid us several $100s per year per hospital system to sell in.
Cool.
What was amazing about that, provided value the hospitals couldn't do otherwise. They were scrambling, but it didn't hit their budget. So instead of a 2-year sales cycle that you typically have selling into hospitals, it's just like government and education, we got our sales cycle down to 30 days because it was the vendors that had to pay for it.
Can I stop you just there for one sec? Because it's like such a huge point you're bringing up. Everybody talks about disruption. I hate disruption. Disruption's awful. Everybody fights you on disruption. I love frictionless innovation. And so what you did was you found a way that you could break into the most difficult organization in the world. Like all the way while you were saying that, all I wanted to say was, man, how did you get a hospital to buy from a small little scrappy startup? Like it's literally anyone outside the space, it's impossible. Like you don't get it to do. And then when you're like 30-day cycle, there is no 30-day life cycle for like a sales lead going into hospital. Like what you got to right there was the absolute holy grail of startups. Like you're selling into the systems that will keep you forever, which are the hardest to get into, which you were getting into relatively easily, and you were selling into them with a short sales cycle. Was it a lot of it timing, or was it by design?
Was what by timing?
The fact that you got such a beautiful trifecta.
Oh, I mean, this is like a lot of startups, right? We started with an idea. We thought we were going to be doing retail supply chain compliant stuff, right? And it was a nice to have, not a need to have. And then one of our founders' friends was actually the chief resident at a hospital in North Carolina and found this opportunity and said, I wonder if Vendormate could work for this. And we're, scrambling not to close the light, shut the lights off. And we said, yes, and we'll find a way to make it work. And so, what started
was designed for this.
Right. But that guy and another buddy of his ended up becoming that doctor, another guy who ran an insurance business, ended up becoming our first salespeople. And we comped them all commission, like giant commission checks, like 15%, and no salary. And they were flying themselves all over the country selling this stuff. And it wasn't easy at first. We had to convince hospitals of this because they didn't even always realize that this mandate was coming down. But as the mandate became more and more apparent, we were able to ride that wave. So part of our job is, when you're in a startup, is educating your customer. And there's 2 types of sort of stories. One's a greenfield story. This comes from real estate, or a brownfield story. And greenfield is when you come in and you got a clear field of grass and you can build your new housing development, and you sell people on why the need is even to have a product like yours. Okay. And that's what we were at that time. A brownfield is where you come into a market where it's already established with like 10 different quasi competitors, and you're not just selling on why what the value is of your existence, but why you are 20 times better, 100 times better than everything else out there. And there's different things that are easy and hard about different parts of that story. But in our case, we just had to educate the market on why they even needed something like this. And it's because the government's about to put a gun to your head on this. And if you don't get something like this, you're screwed. So that became the sale. And then it became, well, and by the way, we're free. We're going to have to get your vendors to pay. There's a challenge at first, but eventually we became the standard in the marketplace. A couple competitors sprouted up, but we had kind of the upper end of the market.
Yeah, which also allows you to scale very quickly, because the easier you make, like, and there's a startups, as you're listening to this, there's like a ton of lessons in here. The easier you make it for, by the way, the customer is your best investor, period. Like all of the time. I promise you, like once you're making lots of money in a growth loop, what we call growth loop is actually established. All investors want to invest in you. We all want to make money. Like none of us actually go into investment to lose money. And it's very easy to see the winners when the customers are telling us who the winners are. So building this, like this very easy to say yes model, whereby you go into them and they're like, okay, cool. We don't have anything to lose. We're just protecting ourselves in the future. Amazing. Okay, next question. As you then, this private equity decision is actually a very difficult decision, because as we all know, like the objective of private equity is to take advantage so that they can, gain advantage, right? That's the whole way that they can make a quick turnaround in 3 or 4 years. Were you nervous about putting control in a private equity's hands before you had reached your full outcome, or what was the decision making like for that?
Well, so the process for that was a lot of people wanted to get some money off the table. We did have some VC money at that time, and there ended up becoming a big transition. So I and a number of people stepped out of the company as part of the PE exit. Some of the founders stayed on board. And so what PE wanted, at least back then, and it's evolved a little bit on time, is they wanted an annuity at that point. They wanted an annuity of cash flows because the business was spitting off a ton of money that they could then grow, with the idea that they could expand it, grow it 3 to 5x and sell it again to strategic buyers. So a couple members of our founding team stayed on board, and a lot of, obviously, the company stayed on board to grow it through it. And I think because our founding team was still there, we basically just had a stronger board and a different boss after that part. I don't think the challenges were too great. Now, they might be in some cases, but what I heard was that, because again, I stepped out at that point, what I heard from my co-founders was that the PE firm they worked with, and I don't want to name names, was actually a really strong one, and they really enjoyed the process.
Wow, and that's not something you hear every day. Yeah. That's good though. That's awesome. And so that was was that your biggest win, or what happened after that?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So that was life-changing. Okay. So I did that, and I was, what was I, like 29, 30 years old or something at the time.
God
so that
bless
was the
you.
biggest one. And I came out of that and I was like, what am I going to do next? So I started kind of kicking tires on maybe angel investing, started taking calls. I was living in DC at the time, and I got brought in as a hired gun CEO, like a quasi co-founder for an existing real estate software business. And that had a lot of like good and bad lessons. And so the overview of this is, the first one for me was life-changing. The second one I did okay. And the third one crashed and burned. So we're going to go in this order. Okay.
Yeah.
So the second one was one company called RoomTag, and we were a real estate software for large office users to be able to really keep track of how they were using their space and realize when they were wasting millions of dollars a year and they could get rid of a floor. The premise here is that when you go into any big office for big law firms, big consulting companies, it always looks like you're full. Okay. But the truth is, you don't have to be full, because people are a gas and they fill up every available spot, to the point that you eventually, the worst case scenario, have a paralegal sitting in a corner office that they're not entitled to because they saw it was open and they grabbed it and they didn't go through the process. So we developed software that would, let everyone let the managers see where everyone was sitting, drag and drop floor plans, which was innovative back then, because again, we're going to an earlier time when people were still doing stuff on paper. Those opportunities are different today. Now they're more AI, but back then it was just digitizing stuff.
What year was this?
This was like 2012 to 20. Okay. Yeah, around 2012. Yeah, 2011, 2013.
The image that always goes in my mind when I hear this is like Mad Men. I don't know if you remember Mad Men, the TV series. about the advertising folks on Madison Avenue, and they would have this huge big office, and then they would have like the secretary that's
Lots of
sitting
alcohol.
outside. Yes, always alcohol. But back in those days, I actually remember maybe a little bit before then, I remember KPMG or Price Coopers did a study, which is that the average amount of square foot per person was something like, 200 square feet or 250 square feet. And so the entire mindset started to turn around. If we could just reduce, Brian doesn't need 250 square feet. Every Brian doesn't need 250 square feet. So if we can just be smart with like co-working and shared desking. And so that the idea is good, because you were actually, again, on the front of a trend, which was all about how do we maximize space.
For sure. Exactly. And I'll tell you what the hard part of that story was, and this goes to a lot of startups, is it's sort of where do you sell your product, high or low, is this product had two value props. And the original founder, who was an architect, and sometimes we had battles over this, right, which ultimately led to me forcing a secondary out, was that she wanted to sell to facilities managers who were going to drag and drop where people were sitting to make their lives easier. And the problem is that when you come into a company, you're selling an expensive product, the C-levels don't care how much time or how you're saving of your low and mid-level workers, or how easy or hard their lives are. A little bit they do, mostly about how they can staff up or staff down there. So there's a one sale to these facility workers of how do you use this, but the real sale, we had to reframe it as you can save millions and millions of dollars over a decade because once you know this stuff, dropping a floor on an option when you don't need it. And so figuring out how to bifurcate that sale. And what we learned was you can't start low. You can't start with the facilities manager. You got to come in and you got to pull your network hard and start with the top. And the CEO or the COO might say, oh, this is really interesting, Joey. I'm going to go play golf with you, but this is not my pay grade. So they'll flip the email down to the facilities manager, but now it's got the power of the COO's, stamp behind it. So the facilities manager has to actually do this, has to be behind it. So you get the push down from the top, from the top, you sell the value at the top, you sell the value at the bottom, and you get the sale through. Brian, are you there? Did I lose you?
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay,
I'm listening.
You're doing locked up on my end. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're great. I hear you. It's like super interesting. And how did you get through that? Or you didn't really?
Through the process. Well, we just, I came on board and I sort of built out a sales team and we staffed up, started selling to law firms. No, it was good. And we were starting to get a process going. We were getting it going. What ended up happening there was my co-founder and I had some disagreement over whether to take money from a particular investor. And that was an interesting thing. And I would never come in as a hired gun CEO again, unless the power constraints were set a certain way. But I was in a situation where I was the CEO, but I sort of I was in charge day to day, but the founder kind of ran the board. And so she ultimately had stronger control over things over my head. And so it created a real difficult power situation where you didn't know who was in charge. And so I forced a secondary on that. I think it was a really cool product. Forced a secondary that took most of my money away. And then there ended up becoming a sale. There was a sale a couple of years later and I made a little bit off of that. But that was good. That was a good learning experience. I made some money off of it, compensated for my time and then some for that. And then I went on to my last one, which was a consumer product called KidsLink. And this is a very cool idea that ran into some really bad market timing. And I would do it differently today. I'll say that one of the benefits of this is because I started with a big win, I was able to sort of have the ability to work on different projects after that were interesting to me. So KidsLink was an app for moms to be able to manage all the information on their kids. So you can manage birth date, you could manage proof of immunization, you could have proof of residency, all this stuff. You could share it with dad when he's in line in the pharmacy. You could share it with the nanny. But ultimately, the goal, the vision was to be able to use this so that you could apply your kids to preschool and then fill out a bunch of forms without having to do anything, say connect with KidsLink. And I'll tell you, there are two things I would do differently about how that. So one is the biggest reason we ended up failing. We were taking off. We had 10 customers. We were pulling in revenue. We were covering our costs. We were selling into preschools at that time to help them with their registration and doing it that way because we like to think of ourselves as revenue first B2B. That's sort of our model, even though it was a consumer product. But what ended up happening was there became this big macro freak out about privacy in this era. So today we know that nothing is really that private, that you can be hacked, whatever, but we make this trade-off of, if someone finds out my kids are allergic to penicillin, who cares, kind of. But in the early days, no one knew anything was hackable. People thought it was private, but for about 2 years, everyone was freaking out about privacy and security. That was just like the zeitgeist in the messaging about everything on the internet. What are you putting online? What are people finding out? And all of a sudden people were like, oh my gosh, you're putting our kids' data online. It's going to be hacked. So our customers were saying it. The media was saying it. There were hit pieces in the media. The VCs were saying it. And it was wild. And we just couldn't overcome it. So that was,
it's also a very hard, dude, it's a very, very hard market. Like, we actually had exactly the same app for older people, which you could argue is even kind of more important. Like, everyone knows what dad should be taking his medicine at such and such a time, with people living for longer and everything else. And it was brutal. Like, it was brutal. Like, and that company is really struggling and has always really struggled because it's just really hard. Joey, what would you surmise?
But real quick, I will say, but we were able to tell the story up to then. We did raise like $2.5 million for that. So we were able, even when we were going through it, to figure out what the power wins were, because we had a lot of users. We had a lot of passionate users on it, right? But yeah. So what was your question?
Learns, as I really want to get into like learns in a moment, from the perspective of Hawaii Angels, like from the other side of the table. But before we get there, like, as a founder, you've had 3 companies. The culmination of all of the companies is a life-changing number of events that have allowed you to be in control of your own life, which is really the objective of life, right? You get to choose. You're in like the tiny percentage of people you can. With all of those lessons learned, speaking to all of the founders that are listening to this, what are the things that give the best chance of success as a founder to break through to a company that's going to be worth a minimum of $50 million to $5 billion?
Oh, I mean, it's finding a customer and a value prop dominantly. So first, you've got to find that opportunity where someone sees enough value in what you're doing that they're willing to pay you money. So being able to find that. And second, it's to be able to communicate that story. And that's communicating that story ultimately to your buyer, but also to the people along the way that are going to help you get there. That could be the people you're going to recruit to work for your company for half price, in exchange for equity. It's going to happen for customers. It's going to happen. And you're going to have to do that with investors as well, because you've got to sell that vision to investors that you have found that incredible value prop that's going to explode on the market to the investors, because they don't have to give you that money. They've got 10,000 other people they can give that money to. And you've got to help them understand that they have FOMO. I call it FOMO, fear of missing out, that if they don't invest in your product or buy your product right now or work for your company, that they're going to be missing out on the greatest opportunity they ever had. And that someone over there who's no smarter, richer, better looking than you are is going to capture it because they had the desire to actually take it and to take that risk.
I love that. And I love, as you're saying it, the Kushi's come out with, as mentioned over description, a CEO's #1 job is not just building a product, but building FOMO. How can an early stage founder create FOMO? So it's very nice follow on, Kushi, even though you wrote this before he said it, but still, how do you create that FOMO as a founder of a company that hasn't got that huge traction yet?
Yeah, so there's different techniques to it, and it's integrated with storytelling. It's what makes a good storyteller a good storyteller. I break it down when I do workshops or people do coaching with me. I break it down into sort of 4 steps, and I can go over those. But ultimately, I think it's easier to start this off by thinking of it as an analogy. I think that when you build FOMO as a founder, it's a little bit like picking up someone in a bar socially. It's this idea of when you come into a bar. You're in a bar and you see someone you want to go talk to. And by the way, I'm married with a kid now. I have a great life with my family life. But you don't just unload your entire story of a data dump on someone as soon as you meet them. But I see wildly too many founders, and more than founders, doing that all the time. Instead, the way you build FOMO is you tease a little bit, and not in a sneaky way, not in a cheesy way, but you think about how you do this interpersonally. You lob something out when you first meet someone. Hey, oh, we have this in common, or something like that. And you see if the person latches onto it and asks you a question. Because ultimately what you're trying to do, the fourth step in my process, is to induce pull. Don't push to people. So it's this series of lobbing things that are interesting to people, see if they latch on, and that'll help you bucket them as you go into, when you tell your story, your 1 or 2 sentences about your startup in a social situation at a coffee shop is when someone latches onto it, do they reveal with their questions that they're a potential employee or customer or investor, or are they just trying to size you up so they can tell their story and they don't really care, so you shouldn't really waste your time talking about your company with them, right? That when you lob something that's questions, you can figure this out, and then you go where they take you. And that's really important. So ultimately, you want to get this chain going where they ask you questions, you give them answers, and their questions aren't confusion questions, because that's a pitch failure. But those questions lead to next steps. Oh, damn, I didn't realize that was such a problem. How do you solve it? Great question. I got an answer for you.
Joey, just to give a real example there, because I think you bring up something so huge. Because what normally happens is, like we're saying, this is what did happen and this is what should happen, right? So what did happen is that you walk in and see somebody in a coffee shop and they're like, what do you do? And you're like, oh my God, let me tell you. And you go through the entire deck in your head and you hit verbal diarrhea all over them. And what you're saying is, if I go back to the example of like Matchbook that I mentioned at the very beginning, they'd be like, what do you do? And say, well, it's not so much what I do, it's the industry that I'm in, because the greatest victim of AI in the future is going to be data. And we have built the best solution that exists on the planet for how data is going to get into that fight with AI. And then you stop, right? And you could say it in 100 different industries, but what the next thing should be, if anyone has any interest in either AI, data, or anything else, they're going to be like, oh, how does that work? Or what did you build? And that's the pull that you mean, right?
Well, and then, yes, you do. And I'll just go ahead and list out the 4 steps, and we don't have to go into all of them, but it's one of them. Yeah. So one is know your audience. Okay. So if you come into an audience that's a general investor audience and you're curing cancer, you can't go into all those crazy details and buzzwords about TN alpha blockers and things like that. So 1 is know your audience. 2 is match the environment. So you need to give people an out. You can't be long-winded if it's in a coffee shop line. You got to figure out, you got to know your environment, know who you're talking with. The third one is and this is what you're talking about, is to focus what's in it for me. Very, very quickly, like in the first 30 seconds. It's who are you, what do you do, and why do you do it? How do you do it? Very, very quickly, so that I can figure out what's the value prop for me. Because it doesn't matter that necessarily that you're using AI. People talk all the time about AI now as if that's the end. I think now when a startup says they're using AI, that's like a startup saying they use an SQL database. Of course you use AI. Everyone's using AI. The real point is who is your customer, and what is the problem you're solving, and why are you 1,000 times better, and what's this moat you create with your subject matter expertise or your pedigree because you've started a bunch of companies. What is it that you bring to the table that makes you able to solve this problem better? And it's not AI. AI is just the medium.
I love that. And I think I think Joey's covered it in a number of different ways. This next question on real life example of a powerful bar pitch. It's a bar pitch that somebody wants to hear, right? It's not about, well, I start with my name and I follow it with the company and I follow with the stuff. To his point, there's this 4 steps that you have to follow, and everything.
I actually think there's a pattern that works for this. You don't have to. But do you mind if I share the pattern? Because
I would love you to. But I also want to just create some context. I love how you gave like the nicotine warning immediately, where you're like, here's a bar pitch. But by the way, I'm married and very happily married with kids, right? But that brings up really interesting context. A lot of the time, Joey, myself, other people will go to a new city. It's not about girl, boy, anything else. It's about like, what is the context of what's important in that moment. There are moments, like I'll go to New York next week. I would love to walk into a bar and there's a venture capitalist on the other end of the bar, and we can have a conversation for like 20 minutes randomly about the coolest thing that's happening in there. Because in that context, following Joey's formula, we will have an amazing engagement, which could lead to great riches in the future, right? The context of what you're involved in has to be established at the beginning. because it might be it's another founder, and you might get to a place of another founder where rather than giving them the whole thing about, oh, a matchbook or a data company, you might be like, hey man, we're raising a Series A pretty soon. What about you guys? Oh, you're raising a Series A pretty soon. Hey, why don't we do this? I'll swap you 5 killer investors for your 5 killer investors, but your product has to be good and my product has to be good. How about we do that? That's a great bar pitch. Because if I'm the other startup, I'm like, that's the best conversation I've had in 2 years. It took me 3 seconds to get there. And now we're going to swap investors. And all I got to show is my company's as good as his company.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have found that if you had data dumped, right? I mean, you've got to find that connection with someone that lobs, that someone says, oh, that's really interesting. I'm doing a startup too. Like you've got to give that lob, that tease that gets people hooked.
I love that. Dude, this is just super random that I just want to throw in there because I knew you'd like it from Fred.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Fred. Oh, that's Fred. I don't want to say your last name because it's hidden on here, but Fred, good to see you, man. I need to work on a startup of your own. Fred here sent me a link to sign up for his product, and I still need to go do that. But I'll check it out.
Though. Isn't it great? Everything is a big circle, and like how you treat people and the engagements that you have with people, life is long. It's short, but it's long. And so just remember, all startups out there, whether it's with investors, whether it's other startups or anything, like the relationships that you build along the way stay with you for good or so bad. So I really like that. Okay, a couple more coming through here, fast and furious. I love this. Okay, so this is from Fred, right? Iterated a lot, was able to tell a greater story after the PE got involved. We got super lucky. I don't know. I don't believe that. I don't think luck has got anything to do with that. I think luck follows great practices, actually.
I will say Fred was one of our strongest engineers. He's a fantastic guy, and he might be able to talk about that story after I left between PE and strategic exit as well. But yeah,
but to your point, he's one of the strongest engineers, and so that's not luck. Like luck. Fortune's the brave, right? Luck follows good things. Sometimes you'll hear about like some random piece of luck that just hits someone, but I promise you it's only the sometimes. If you follow the right processes to build your startup, you build up the probability of luck following you. Okay, what have we got? Shashishant. Okay, how do you keep fundraising deck engaged enough that investors feel desperate for the next slide?
So so there's a technique for this. So just like when you're in a verbal discussion with someone and you tease and you lob and you get them to hook onto what you're saying, what you're going to find as you transition from a conversation to a deck is that these conversations tend to start flowing in a pretty similar narrative pattern that's linear, right? It tends to follow. And so what you can start to find is that you can start to force people down a path, or encourage people down a path. So what I normally recommend is that whenever you get to a problem slide, that at the end of the problem slide, you sort of tee up something that sets up a question that gets answered in the minds of the person on the next slide. So at the end of the problem slide, you're sort of teeing up. Sometimes you'll say it and sometimes you won't, but if you actually say it, you're like, well, okay, so this is the problem. Now I'm gonna show you how we solve it. Or do you wanna know how we solve it? So that someone's like, well, yeah, they're getting chills. Like, yes, I want to know how you solve it. And they're sitting on the edge of their seat and they're getting FOMO and they're craving and pulling the next slide. Or you go to how you solve it and you're like, okay, but what about the competition? Aren't there 12 other people that do this? And then you say, I bet you're asking about the competition. We've got a competition slide right here. So you're trying to sort of guide people through this series of questions that's going to make them pull it from you, but it becomes their question, not yours. And this also goes to another point, which is that it's actually pretty rare these days that you go all the way through a deck in a linear flow. You have this sort of simulated pattern that you send aside, but in most pitching these days is one-on-one or one-on-two. It's at a coffee shop or it's online, and you're going to have a conversation with someone and they're going to ask you a question. You're going to say, that's a really good question. Let me flip to slide 7 real quick for you. And you take them around that. But ultimately you want every slide to tee up a natural question that you can answer elsewhere.
I love that. Best deck you've ever seen? And what did it do? A deck that like you saw from somebody that you thought that's off the charts.
Oh, there have been so many. It's hard for me to remember specifically, but I'll say there was a deck recently for a company that's going through Blue Startups, which is an accelerator here. And it was a company that was founded by the CTO of Jack in the Box, which is kind of wild. But they had 80 people, in their tech team. And she was applying sort of these lessons of technology to the automotive industry and helping low-tech automotive service centers, like people that are selling you transmissions, sell better, basically lose fewer deals by using AI voice analysis on the calls to be able to recommend things as they were going. But she was just nailing every step of the way, from the pedigree of her background to the need in the market, to what she was hearing, to the traction she was getting. 5 months in, she was already at 150 grand of ARR, because her co-founder has built, billion-dollar sales teams before, and they were just checking every box to go through. And we were lucky to get in as sort of a pre-seed, and now they're going off and raising money from VCs.
Beautiful. And I'm going to say, Kishley, check your email. I just sent you over a deck. I want to, the best deck that I've ever seen is the one that I actually just create. Actually, that's not fair. I've seen plenty of great decks, but definitely the best deck that I've ever created is the one that I just created for Matchbook. And it was because I looked at the other deck that they had, and it was a little bit like what I mentioned at the beginning. Sometimes you have to change the story to make it very different. So if anybody looks at matchbookai.com, you'll see like the look on the website and everything else. It's been around for a little while. So it's like all of the old fashioned blues and everything that goes with it. But what I wanted to do is create something that's for investors. Now, I'll share with you a couple of things here. And I really want to get Joey's opinion on this too. Like, investors don't care what business you're in. Like, we don't care at all. It makes no difference to me if you're a cybersecurity company, if you're a data company, if you've got AI, if you don't have AI. Like, none of this matters at all. All I care about is the return. Why do I care about the return? Because we have to give a return. Like, whether it's Joey with the Angels or whether it's me with my LP, and my LP is a family office, but like, we have to get a return. If we don't get a return, then big bad people come after us, right? Or maybe not, but maybe so, right? Maybe you never know if it's Irish rules or if it's not Irish rules until afterwards. Okay?
Well, you lose your company if you can't do it, right?
And you lose everything. Like, what kind of job prospects are there for a failed VC? Like, there ain't nothing. We're not even put on a till in McDonald's after this stage. Like, there's nothing left to go. And so we have to get a return. And so the deck should speak to the return, or at least the teaser. So I created a teaser in Matchbook, which actually doesn't even mention the product for the first 5 slides. Kishley, if you've opened your email, share it whenever you want to share it, because I want to share this with you. It's literally 10 years working in investment has all culminated in this moment where the product is hardly mentioned, and it is a pure tease. Now, I am hoping, of course, Kishley's asleep, is awake even, but it's a 50-50. But if he's there, no, Kishley, not Joey's details. The deck. Look in your email and bring up the.
It's not my main email anyway. I'd rather not share that one.
Yeah, no emails for Joey. And then but bring up the deck when you got a sec. Okay. So he'll bring up the deck hopefully in a second. Then and if he struggles to bring it up, I'll bring it up on the next one. But so the whole deck is just based on the return, and how a VC looks at a return is, what is the valuation right now? What is the annual revenue right now? What's the valuation going to be at the next round that you're going to do? What's the revenue going to be at the next round? So it's not just pie in the sky that you're speaking about. And what's the straight line to be able to get to that revenue? Like, that's all that matters. In the case of Matchbook, what we said is, look, it's 3.5 ARR right now. It's going to grow to 5 ARR by the end of this year. Here's 2 big companies, which is closing a renewal and extension. And here's another 5 companies that are going to come in, which will bring it to the 5. It's going to go from 5 to 10 because we're going to do, no, not our deck, Kishley. The deck that is the one that I just sent you by email. I just sent it to you 2 minutes ago. Look in your email. And then so in that case, they're going to grow to 10 next year, at which stage we're going to do a Series A at between 80 to 120. And so all any investor cares about, if Brian said that the valuation today is 22 pre, right, and 3 is going to be raised, and the valuation in 12 months' time is going to be 80, which is going to be based on a 10 revenue, then what's the likelihood that he's lying? Right? That's all. That's all that matters. If the likelihood is low, and it can be looked into, and that as the other investor, that they're comfortable that they're the right numbers, people will invest because it's a 3x in 12 months. A 3x in 12 months is bueno, right? That's what people want. So my only caution, I think Kishley's struggling. I'll bring it up for you next week, okay? But like my caution to people is just be really careful. You don't just do a deck like the original matchbook deck was, which is 15 pages of deeply technical. Hey, there you go. Good man. Okay, bring it up. So look, if you see slide 1, this is a 5-slide deck. Slide 1, all it says is, no, just stay in slide 1 for a sec, Kishley. You don't need to go down yet. Good man. Thank you so much. And so all it just says is what the revenue increase is going to be. At the bottom down there, it's some pretty small text, but it just says what the current valuation is, what the future valuation is, and what it's going to grow to. And we're going to hit 10 million in 2026. So this first slide, it just lays out one thing. Is this company telling the truth or not? Because if they are telling the truth, this is a company everybody wants to invest in. Go down to slide 2 there for a sec. Growing at 70% calendar year 2025 in 2025. Now, as a VC, we would love to have 200%, but in all honesty, 70% growth at a 3.5 mil annual is not terrible. Like, it's okay as long as it can really, really jump up in major money, especially when it hasn't raised massively. So again, it leads to believe. Next slide. Don't just take our word for it. 10% of the Fortune 200 companies use Matchbook. That's monster. That's like what Joey was saying at the beginning about 50, 60, 70% of hospitals use our software. That's all a VC needs to hear, because it means it's not just schmucks using your product, people who haven't got a clue. The smartest people in the world are using it. What's the product? Nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares. Okay, then it goes down the next one and it talks very briefly about the product. And I mean ever so briefly, and it immediately goes into team. Right? As everybody knows, I joined the team because we needed to change the message. I have the jewel of the Nile for anybody who's got the old Harrison Ford references, but we complement each other beautifully on that. And then the next slide is the final slide. Ba-boom. Okay, you can pull it down. Thank you, buddy. And so this is a teaser deck. This is not the full deck. But remember, an average VC, and so I want you to talk about this, the good, the bad, and the ugly, Joey, but because I think it's a great place to sort of semi-finish, is because VCs just want to know that it's a product that's big enough to make it to the end, a sizable outcome, which can make the entire fund, and that there is a plan trajectory-wise that means you're going to get there before your kids are 70 years old.
Yeah, and I think the starting point for this is that VCs work on actuarial math as well, right? So of course they want the power fund, but their incentives are they want to invest in a bunch of companies, sometimes 40, the Bay Area, sometimes 40 companies at a time. And the first one they invest in, they need to make enough money, as you talk about, to pay off that entire fund, because they don't make much money unless they first pay off the fund. And then after that one that pays off the fund, they certainly want a second one. And if they're really, really lucky, they get 3 out of 40 that take off and do that action. So they're analyzing this from the very beginning of, is this a company that can give these like 1,000% returns and whatnot to be able to pay off the fund. But the actuarial math differs in the Bay Area versus elsewhere. It differs if you're in an angel group versus if you're in a VC. So you can learn a little bit about the different processes there.
Yeah. And I think to your point, if you're dealing with a highly technical ex-founder of a monster data software company that exited to Sequoia and now he's a partner in Sequoia, for God's sake, don't show them that deck. Okay. Like, bring them through.
Tailor for your audience,
Yes. Like, bring it through the most painfully technology centric discussion where like, he's like, oh my God, this thing is just monster. So I think your formula is so good. And this is where emotional intelligence is so much more important than intelligence, because people who are just playing the numbers game, they walk into that bar, boy, girl, whatever, and they're just like, hey, man, I got this. This is what I do. This is where I am. And people are like, oh, my God, that guy is so overbearing. Well, you want the person who's like, hey, I just overheard your conversation and you were talking about VC. I definitely don't want to interrupt, but I'm a VC down in California. We've invested in like a couple of hundred companies. I love New York, man. I would love to like help you in any way I can with what I got on the West Coast. Boom, leave it. That's it, right? And so now you've engaged in a way, and if it's a founder, if it's a startup, if it's an investor, if it's someone, I actually know people, Joey, who they've literally raised over, I don't know if it's 10, but definitely over $5 million just by hanging in the Beverly Hills Hotel bar.
Ha.
Nothing else.
No,
I'm not even kidding. I'm not even kidding. And what they do is they profile. It was one particular guy, and he would profile I won't say I shouldn't. I got the founder. The startup was terrible, but he literally would sit in the bar, and he would wait for someone to come in, and he would look for. It would be like, you know, that movie. Have you ever seen the movie Sixth Sense? Where the little kids like, I see dead people everywhere. Well, it's like he sees rich people everywhere, right? So people would walk in the bar, and he would profile that person, and he would be like, that's a good opportunity. And then he would say, look, I don't want to do something, but I have the coolest entertainment idea in the world. Have you got 10 minutes? Because I feel you love entertainment. And then he would and he raised over $5 million.
That goes to a question, that's sort of a difference between patron style investors and fundamental style investors, right? With the fundamentals investors are people like you and me that like dig into the data and want to make sure they're checking the boxes and it can grow. And a patron investor is like, dude, they're loaded. They're 100 millionaires. And they're like, dude, I really like you. I love our conversation. We're going with this. I don't have time to really dig into this, but you know what? Here's a couple $100,000. Go with God and come back to me in 2 years and show me the results. Were the people that he was meeting in the hotel, were they more like patron investors, that he was just finding people that really just dug him and dug his vision and weren't really digging in?
Yeah. I just think every single thing goes back to what you said. Like, it's know your audience. There are people. I met a guy on Saturday at an event that I went over to that I thought somebody was going to be at. It was pretty famous, and that person wasn't there. But I had this really kind of extra benefit of meeting this chap. And he had like one of the biggest furniture businesses in the entire world. And he's like an awesome human being. And he was like a great tennis player when he was a kid. And he and I we had an investment conversation, which was 59 minutes tennis. He was like buddies with Jimmy Connors, and like he beat John McEnroe. And like we had this great conversation and 1 minute investment, because in the last minute I said to him, you look bored. You look so bored. Like, man, come on. You built this great company, and now what are you doing here? And he's like, I want back in. So I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to meet up and we're going to have some fun together. That was the pitch. And it wasn't even a pitch. Honestly, I would even hate to categorize it as a pitch. It was something that I felt, but it was an alignment. And so we focused on the alignment and we stuck with the alignment. So I think there are people like him. And so look, every founder believes that you have a great product, right? The statistics would suggest that information may not be entirely accurate, right? But everybody believes they have a great product. Never try and scam people. Never try and get people to do things that is going to lose them money, because it's a short-term lose for everyone and it's a long-term lose for everyone, right? But if you in your greatest intentions believe you have something good, there are different investors for different stages and for you at different times. There's an investor out there for everybody. Some of those investors are in a bar in Beverly Hills, and it is a hell of a lot better them spending their money on you than them spending their money on other stuff that they might be spending their money on today. Other investors are people like myself and Joey, where like Joey runs a hugely influential group of angels who come together like a VC. And I run a family office, which has turned into a venture capitalist on its own. Like, we're different, but we're kind of the same. But depending on where our mindset is and on what's happened to us the day before with our founders, even we change. So categorize, I just want to for Sadiq, I appreciate it, my man. You are always a fit. Like, for us, everything is about just trying to show that we can get that trajectory up. So stay in contact. Being on these calls are really good. Pinging me by email is really good. Like, just keep letting me know about your growth and your advancements. And then what happens is a moment comes along where I'm either an idiot or I realize there's a company here that's growing to and beyond $100,000 a month in revenue, and we got a tiger by the tail. right? So you just stay engaged and keep us going. What I would like to do is just at the end here, Joey, is to firstly have you repeat the 4 areas of your system, because I actually think it's a lesson on life and everybody should follow it for new friends, people they meet and everything, but it's definitely a lesson in venture. And just maybe a final piece of advice that you have for founders in general, and maybe a something that you want to just leave everybody with.
Sure, for sure. Okay, so the 4 steps that I've come up with, and this is how I train on it. I think it does work in social situations too. 1 is to know your audience. 2 is to match the environment, tailor for your environment. 3 is to focus on what's in it for me, for your audience. And the 4th is the big magic one, which is to induce, pull, don't push. And that's really how you get it going. I would love, and I can give advice too, but I would like to kind of read this bar pitch pattern out because I think it might be helpful to people. I coach people to follow a specific pattern to start, and you can evolve it over time. It seems really basic, but it nails the important things. So the pattern that I have is company name is a generic service or product type, is a what that helps who, the buying audience, accomplish what value prop. So company name is a generic product type that helps the buying audience do or accomplish what value prop. And you can find that on my Twitter as well. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'll send it to you. But basically, when I do workshops, I have everyone actually draft one of those and sell it to their neighbor. And the most important thing about that, and the way you know that you've nailed a bar pitch, is when the person that's listening to you asks you an incredibly interesting question about it to keep the conversation going. Because you are not trying to encapsulate your whole business. You're trying to get people to ask you one interesting question because you tease them. So I think the takeaway of that there's one big piece of advice is realize that if you're a founder, the number one most important thing you are doing as CEO is constantly building FOMO, cheerleading, and exciting people about the value of what you're building. The people that are buying the product, the people that are going to work for you, and the people that are going to be investing in you. Because if you don't accomplish that, everything else is dead in the water.
Yeah, it's such great advice. It is not one email repeated 50 times, sent every single 3 days to the same investor. There are so many amazing ways that you can tease, but it's the same as anybody that you're very interested in building a relationship with. You'll hit them on certain areas, you'll do stuff, but actually, you know what? Do this bit yourself. This is easy. Joey's giving you loads. Joey, you're a legend, my friend, and I'm going to see you when you come over to California, right? You're going to come down next week.
A couple weeks ago. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, my friend. Thank you so much. Awesome, awesome, awesome advice. Bar pitch all day long. Everybody get out there, make some money, raise some investment, and get back on track.